Blake Lively has always been seen as one of the untouchable stars of Hollywood, a woman whose life looked like a dream, with the glamour of the red carpet, the support of her famous husband Ryan Reynolds, and a career that seemed to flow effortlessly, from one success to another. But behind the carefully constructed image of elegance and control, there are shadows that have been growing, and the events of recent weeks have pulled back the curtain to reveal a much darker reality. What was once whispered gossip has now exploded into headlines, and at the center of it all stands Justin Baldoni, a man known for his charm, his creative projects, and his reputation for being both thoughtful and ambitious. But today his name is tied to something that could shatter Blake Lively's carefully built world. The legal battle that is unfolding is not just another celebrity spat. It is being described as devastating, with documents, testimonies, and strategies that could flip her world upside down. The power dynamic has shifted, the media frenzy has ignited, and the consequences for Blake Lively may be unlike anything she has faced before her luck has finally run out. Blake Lively has lived a life that many would describe as charmed from her early beginnings in Hollywood to her rise as one of the most recognizable stars of her generation. She was celebrated for her beauty, her talent, her family life, and the seemingly perfect balance she managed to maintain in an industry notorious for breaking people down. Yet what most of the public never knew was that behind the glitz and smiles, there were layers of tension, obligations, and secret deals that were quietly stacking up like a house of cards waiting for the slightest shake to bring everything crashing down. And when Justin Baldoni entered the scene, few could have predicted just how deeply his presence would shift the balance of that fragile structure, because Baldoni was not simply another actor or filmmaker. He was a man with ambitions that extended beyond the screen into the realms of business influence and storytelling, at a scale that demanded both creative brilliance and legal precision. He had built a reputation on positivity and inspiration. But like anyone operating at the highest levels of the entertainment industry, he understood that sometimes power meant being willing to fight battles in the courts as fiercely as one fought them in the studios. And so when whispers began that a legal confrontation was brewing between Lively and Baldoni, people assumed it would fade away like so many celebrity disputes. Yet instead, it gathered momentum, fueled by documents, leaks, and strategic maneuvers that turned speculation into concrete action. The first sparks of the conflict were said to have emerged over intellectual property rights connected to a joint venture, a project that began with the promise of collaboration and mutual benefit. But as months turned into years, what had once looked like a golden opportunity soured into suspicion and mistrust. Lively, whose brand was carefully tied to wholesome sophistication, was protective of her image and the ventures attached to her name. Baldoni, equally protective of his reputation and his creative vision, found himself at odds with her over-control timelines and ownership. The core of the dispute revolved around who had the rightful authority to make critical decisions and who ultimately would profit from the work that had already been poured into the endeavor. For fans who adored Lively, the idea that she could be embroiled in a fierce legal clash was difficult to imagine. Her public persona was free from scandal, and her interviews exuded a calm charm that never hinted at hostility. But the truth revealed in court filings painted a far less polished picture. The language was sharp, the claims bold, and the counterclaims even bolder. Lawyers on both sides crafted arguments that highlighted not just professional disagreements, but also deeply personal frustrations that had built up between the two parties. Baldoni accused Lively of stalling key aspects of development, allegedly delaying progress for reasons that were less about artistic concerns and more about control and positioning within the industry. Meanwhile, Lively's camp pushed back, asserting that Baldoni was attempting to strong-arm her into concessions that undermined her role and diminished her contributions. What made the battle so shocking to observers was not merely the conflict itself, but the evidence suggesting that Lively had perhaps underestimated Baldoni. Her belief that her status would shield her from aggressive legal tactics was proving misplaced, because Baldoni came prepared with documentation, correspondences, and contracts that supported his stance and gave his team a firm foundation to argue their case. The media was quick to seize upon every revelation. Headlines blared about betrayal, shattered partnerships, and the possibility that this case could have ripple effects across the entertainment industry, with insiders suggesting that major studios and investors were watching closely to see how the dispute played out. If Baldoni succeeded, it could embolden others in similar situations. to challenge long-established hierarchies of celebrity control. And if Lively faltered, it could mark the first significant crack in her seemingly impenetrable facade. The emotional weight of the ordeal began to surface in subtle ways. Her appearances became more carefully curated, interviews turned more restrained, and sources whispered of the stress beginning to weigh heavily on her usually composed demeanor. Close friends reportedly expressed concern over her sleepless nights and the toll that endless legal meetings were taking on her, while Baldoni, on the other hand, projected calm confidence appearing at events, smiling, speaking about his projects as though the storm brewing in the background was little more than a distraction. Yet those closest to him knew he was working tirelessly behind the scenes, analyzing every detail with his team, determined not just to win, but to establish a precedent that would cement his authority in the industry. The courtroom exchanges themselves were described as electric, both sides fielding high-powered attorneys who delivered arguments with the precision of surgeons cutting into the heart of the matter, and though much of the process was shielded from public view, enough details leaked to fuel the fires of speculation and fan debate across social media forums, divided into camps, some defending Lively with fierce loyalty, others admiring Baldoni for standing his ground against a Hollywood powerhouse. The drama escalated when a pivotal document was introduced, one that allegedly demonstrated clear intent on Lively's part to restrict Baldoni's influence in ways that went beyond reasonable protection of her brand. If proven valid, it could shift the balance of the case dramatically, stripping her of the advantage she once thought she had. At the same time, her lawyers countered with equally striking evidence, arguing that Baldoni had acted prematurely on key decisions, undermining the collaborative spirit of the original agreement. The back and forth grew relentless, each revelation threatening to tip the scales further until the weight of it all seemed unbearable to those watching from the sidelines beyond the legal papers and courtroom exchanges. However, there was the human element, the unraveling of a partnership that had once held promise. The dissolution of trust between two figures who had initially envisioned something greater together for Lively. It meant confronting the reality that her reputation for grace and untouchability was no longer a shield for Baldoni. It meant proving that his place in the industry was not dependent on bending to established stars, but on carving his own path regardless of the opposition. And for the industry at large, it was a reminder that no matter how carefully crafted an image may be, the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, it can devastate even the brightest of stars. As the second phase of the legal drama between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni unfolded, the atmosphere surrounding both stars grew more intense and more complicated. By the day, industry analysts, legal experts, and fans alike tried to make sense of the tangled web of filings, motions, and counter-arguments that seemed to grow heavier. With each passing week, the conflict was no longer a quiet, behind-the-scenes matter. It had burst into the public arena with a force that neither party could easily control, and while both Lively and Baldoni had once enjoyed the luxury of crafting their public images carefully through curated interviews, glossy magazine spreads, and strategic social media posts, the reality of a high-stakes courtroom battle left little room for image management because the filings spoke louder than any carefully rehearsed statement or Instagram caption could. Lively, who had built her brand on poise, charm, and relatability, found herself described in unflattering terms within legal documents, terms that painted her not as the benevolent star admired by millions, but as a calculating figure willing to leverage her celebrity status to exert control over projects in ways that went beyond fairness. Her attorneys naturally pushed back, highlighting Baldoni's alleged overreach and arguing that he had sought to diminish her role from the outset, portraying him as someone who presented himself as collaborative, yet acted unilaterally when it suited his ambitions. The tension between perception and reality created a perfect storm for the media, who fed on the narrative of Hollywood glamour meeting cold legal reality. Every detail was dissected, debated, and spun into headlines that blurred the line between fact and speculation. The pressure on Lively intensified as rumors circulated that several major studios and potential collaborators were quietly monitoring the outcome of her case, not simply out of curiosity, but because their own financial stakes and reputations might be affected if she was perceived as difficult to work with. The implication was clear. A loss in this legal battle could ripple out far beyond this single dispute, damaging her negotiating power on future projects and undermining the pristine image she had so carefully maintained. Meanwhile, Baldoni found his own reputation shifting in ways he could not have entirely anticipated. While some critics accused him of being opportunistic and unnecessarily combative, others praised him for refusing to be overshadowed by celebrity power dynamics. His willingness to engage in the grueling process of litigation against someone as established and beloved as Blake Lively was interpreted by some as a sign of strength, independence, and determination to redefine his place in the entertainment hierarchy. And though his calm public appearances suggested composure, those close to him described the immense workload he carried, reviewing endless contracts, meeting with attorneys, strategizing and preparing for the unpredictable twists that each court session seemed to bring. As the weeks turned into months, the emotional toll on both parties became impossible to ignore. Whispers of Lively's growing exhaustion circulated in Hollywood circles. Sources suggested she was struggling to balance the demands of her family life, her career obligations, and the relentless stress of the case. Insiders noted she had become far more guarded in interactions, wary of how any word or gesture could be interpreted as weakness or as evidence of arrogance. Baldoni, though outwardly steady, was also under immense strain. The financial cost of litigation, the constant scrutiny, and the personal disappointment of seeing a promising collaboration dissolve into hostility weighed heavily on him, and those who knew him described moments of reflection when he questioned whether pursuing victory in court was worth the personal cost. Yet despite doubts, both pressed on, neither willing to concede, because for Lively, conceding would mean admitting vulnerability and risking a permanent scar on her career. And for Baldoni, conceding would mean surrendering the opportunity to establish himself as a formidable force in the industry. On his own terms, the turning point of this phase came when a series of communications were introduced into evidence: emails and text messages exchanged during the early days of their collaboration, documents that revealed glimpses of enthusiasm, optimism, and promises of mutual respect, in stark contrast to the bitter accusations now filling courtrooms. These early exchanges became a double-edged sword for both sides. While Lively's attorneys pointed to certain phrases as evidence that she had always sought balance and fairness, Baldoni's team highlighted other lines that seemed to confirm his warnings about her attempts to centralize control in her hands, the emotional whiplash created by seeing once friendly words weaponized in a courtroom was described by observers as devastating because it underscored the tragic collapse of what had once been a relationship filled with creative promise. The impact of this battle began spreading further outward as journalists unearthed past interviews and public appearances, scrutinizing them for hidden clues. Moments when Lively had spoken vaguely about challenges, or when Baldoni had alluded to obstacles in his work. Suddenly, those old statements were reinterpreted through the lens of the current legal war, fueling endless cycles of commentary, podcasts, and online debates. Fans argued fiercely, with some framing Lively as a victim of calculated exploitation, while others portrayed Baldoni as a brave challenger willing to confront entrenched celebrity privilege. What both narratives ignored, however, was the complexity of reality, because the truth, as always, was not neatly black or white, but a messy entanglement of ambitions, fears, miscommunications, and conflicting visions. Yet the court was not tasked with parsing emotions, but with untangling facts, contracts, obligations, and breaches. And in that arena, what mattered most was evidence, not sentimentality. And so each side dug deeper into their archives, producing exhibits that stretched back years, weaving a story not only about this project, but about broader patterns of behavior each hoped would sway the outcome. Lively's camp argued that she had always protected her brand fiercely because her image was her livelihood, suggesting that this vigilance was being unfairly twisted into an accusation of manipulation. Baldoni's camp countered that her vigilance had crossed the line into obstruction, holding back progress and diminishing the collaborative spirit they had once promised to honor. As the filings grew denser, the stakes escalated to new heights. Whispers emerged that settlement talks had briefly surfaced, only to collapse almost immediately. Insiders suggested that the gulf between what Lively was willing to concede and what Baldoni demanded was simply too vast, and so the process pressed forward with neither side blinking. The lack of compromise signaled to many that this would be a long battle, one destined to reach a dramatic conclusion in court rather than behind closed doors. For Hollywood, this was more than gossip. It was a test case, a mirror reflecting the evolving power dynamics of an industry where traditional star power was increasingly challenged by entrepreneurial creators, directors, and producers who demanded equal footing and respect. And for those watching from outside the industry, it was a fascinating spectacle. A story of two admired figures locked in a battle that revealed the fragility behind their polished public images as the curtain began to close on this second act of the saga. The sense was that the worst was still ahead, because both sides had shown only portions of their arsenals, and everyone knew that the most devastating revelations, the ones capable of altering not only the outcome of the case, but also the trajectories of two high-profile careers, were still waiting in the wings, ready to emerge when the moment was right. By the time the legal clash between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni entered its third stage, the case had evolved far beyond what anyone initially imagined. What had once appeared to be a dispute over contractual misunderstandings now resembled a sprawling battle with implications reaching into reputations, finances, future opportunities, and the fragile balance of power within Hollywood itself. Both sides had invested heavily in the struggle, and both understood that the midpoint of the process was not a time to slow down, but a time to escalate strategies, sharpen arguments, and prepare for the decisive strikes that could tip the momentum entirely one way or the other. Lively, who had long relied on the strength of her public persona, found that shield becoming thinner with each leak, and filing the pristine image she had spent years cultivating now bore cracks that critics and tabloids eagerly highlighted. Articles dissected her every move, from her courtroom wardrobe to her strained expressions, suggesting that even the smallest detail revealed some deeper truth about her state of mind. Whether those interpretations were fair or not mattered little, because perception was quickly becoming reality, and reality was the one opponent she could not control. Baldoni, meanwhile, navigated his own shifting reputation. His decision to hold firm rather than compromise had earned him a new level of respect among certain circles, particularly among creators who felt sidelined by celebrity dominance. Yet that same resolve made him a target of accusations that he was exploiting the situation to elevate his name at Lively's expense, regardless of opinion. What no one could deny was that he remained unflinching in his determination to see the case through to its conclusion. His team continued to deliver new evidence piece by piece, building a narrative of consistency, credibility, and persistence in the face of immense opposition. As court sessions grew more dramatic, whispers spread about bombshell evidence waiting to be unveiled, documents that allegedly contained not just contractual details, but correspondence with executives, investors, and third parties who had been indirectly caught in the web of the dispute. If revealed, these materials could confirm allegations that Lively had acted in ways designed to limit Baldoni's influence, or alternatively expose weaknesses in Baldoni's claims. Either scenario promised seismic shifts in the trial, and so anticipation grew heavy in both the press and the public at the same time. The psychological weight of the process was becoming harder to conceal. Insiders close to Lively described her as exhausted, emotionally drained by the endless cycles of preparation and performance. She had always been adept at presenting calm under pressure, but the relentless nature of litigation meant there was no stage to leave behind. At the end of the day, the stress followed her home, invaded her conversations, and became a constant shadow looming over her otherwise carefully managed life. Friends worried about her health, her energy, and the long-term damage to her outlook. Baldoni, though publicly projecting steadiness, was not immune to similar burdens. Sleepless nights, strategy meetings that stretched into the early hours, and the constant pressure of knowing that every move could define his professional identity for years left him equally strained. As the dust began to settle around the explosive legal battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, the conclusion left observers with more questions than answers. The courtroom had become a stage where ambition, trust, betrayal, and resilience played out in ways that stripped away the polished masks both stars had worn for years. What emerged was a story not only of a contract dispute, but of the fragility of partnerships in an industry where power and image are as valuable as talent. For Lively, the ordeal forced her to confront the limits of her influence. The cracks in her public image had been revealed, and though she retained loyal supporters, she could no longer rely on the same unshakable aura of invulnerability that had once defined her career. The battle had reminded everyone that even the brightest stars are not immune to shadows. For Baldoni, the outcome was equally transformative. He had entered the conflict as an underdog, challenging a Hollywood powerhouse, and he emerged with a reputation forged in fire. His willingness to fight, his insistence on fairness, and his refusal to yield had earned him new respect, but also new scrutiny. He was no longer seen simply as a charming creative voice, but as a figure capable of shifting the balance of power. The broader industry, too, had been reshaped by the conflict. Whispers circulated of new contract negotiations being conducted with sharper eyes and greater caution, as both stars and creators realized that even the strongest relationships could crumble if foundations were not built on transparency and mutual respect for fans. The case served as a sobering reminder that the glamorous images projected on screens and red carpets rarely reflect the full truth behind the scenes beneath the gowns and the smiles. Lie insecurities, ambitions, and struggles that can erupt into devastating public battles. When trust erodes in the end, neither Lively nor Baldoni emerged entirely unscathed, but both emerged changed. And in Hollywood, where reinvention is as common as success, the scars left by this conflict may yet become the seeds of new chapters for both their careers, yet the echoes of their clash will linger, reminding all who watch that luck eventually runs out. And when it does, what remains is the strength or weakness of the choices we make.